Hello, everybody. This is Gerald Celente, and we have with us today, and honored to be with us, Judge Andrew Napolitano. When it comes to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, I'll put him up against anybody in America, all around the world, to give you the facts of what they mean, how we've lost those rights, and what we have to do to get them back. Judge, thanks for being on today.
Pleasure to be with you, my dear friend.
You know, you have this article that's coming out tomorrow, and today's April 12th. It comes out tomorrow. The Pentagon Papers, again. Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Can the government morally steal data about allies and enemies and then make it a crime to reveal the data, even when the revelation shows that the government has been lying about killing? What to do about high-ranking government officials who lie about war? When the First Amendment states that, quote, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, does it really mean no law? And you go on talking about how these documents are coming out about the Ukraine war, which, by the way, is not a proxy war. The United States is at war, as I see it, with Russia. And these documents prove it. So please tell us more about what you've written about and how they...
Well, let me start by saying that you've been saying this, and we've been saying this for a long time, and the documents substantiate the presence of American special forces on the ground in Ukraine and British special forces as well. But beyond that, the documents show that the American government has known for a long time that the Ukraine side is doomed to fail. The kill ratio favoring Russia is 7-1, meaning the Russians kill 7 Ukrainian soldiers for every 1 Russian that the Ukrainians kill. Now, any high school student could do the math. I mean, that can't last much longer. Ukraine is already down to the point where they are kidnapping people your age and mine, males your age and mine, and 16 and 17-year-olds, training them for 2 weeks and then pushing them to the front lines, from which, of course, they never return. So the government has known that Ukraine was about to lose. When Secretary of Defense Austin testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee, he lied by saying, yeah, Ukraine is in great shape. Look for a good spring and look for many battle successes in the winter, because he already knew about this kill ratio. The documents also reveal that the American government has concluded that Ukraine's air defenses will be degraded to, it's an easy number to remember, 0 effectiveness by the end of May. And former 4-star general, former member of the Raytheon board of directors, now Secretary of Defense Austin, knew about that when he materially misled the Senate Armed Services Committee. So we know that Joe Biden is fighting a land war. And to your point at the outset of this podcast, question, are American boys using American military equipment to fire American ammunition at Russian boys? Answer, yes. Is the American CIA stealing Russian intel and giving it to Ukraine intel? Answer, yes. If that's not a definition of America at war with Russia, I don't know what is.
And Putin said it, America's at war with Russia. And by the way, we had Lloyd Austin, again, who you mentioned, our Secretary of Defense, who formerly sat on the board of directors of Raytheon, the second largest defense contractor, admitting months ago that American advisors were on the ground in Ukraine because of the complexity of the weapons, and saying that we had to make sure that they didn't go in the wrong direction. Or
Correct.
So, in other words, the Americans are firing the weapons at the Russians.
Correct. This very sophisticated HIMARS, I understand it from Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor. The Americans aim them, maintain them, find the target on a computer screen, and then another team in Ukraine, and then another team of Americans west of them in Poland pulls the trigger. That's why I say American boys are using American equipment to fire American ammunition at Russian boys, targeted and aimed by American boys. It's war. It's not even war by another name. It's just war that's not publicly declared. It's war that's not legal, because Biden can't do this without a declaration of war, and Congress can't declare war on anybody it wants. We've signed treaties. Congress can only declare war on a country whose military is threatening ours. Does the Russian military threaten the United States? No. Does the U.S. threaten Russia? Well, let's see. We have nukes in Italy. We have nukes in the Netherlands. We have nukes in Poland aimed at Moscow. Can you imagine how we would react if, say, the Chinese had nukes in Mexico aimed at Dallas? And you'll know how Putin feels.
Yeah. Or the Russians up in Canada with missiles aimed at New York.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Again,
the only intellectually honest person in all of this, the president is not intellectually honest. Tony Blinken is not intellectually honest. Lloyd Austin is not intellectually honest. I'll tell you who is. Vladimir Putin.
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin said the Americans started this war in 2014 when they fomented that so-called color revolution that overthrew the popularly elected and Russian-aligned president of Ukraine. The Americans started this war when they moved NATO 800 miles eastward, contrary to the promises that Jim Baker and George H.W. Bush made to Mikhail Gorbachev. And as if to poke the NATO elbow in Putin's ribs, what did they just do? Join Finland to NATO. At the height of this war, added another 800 miles of a common border between Russia and NATO. So these characters, these creeps in NATO and in the State Department, they want war. Victoria Nuland, you remember her from the Trump impeachment. She's number 3 in the State Department. She said, we won't rest until the Ukrainian flag is flying over Crimea. Let me tell you that there is more of a chance of Arizona being given back to Mexico than the Ukrainian flag flying over Crimea. Crimea has been part of Russia since 1730.
Yeah, this is the Trends Journal magazine from back in 2014. See how happy that guy is. The United States overthrow of the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine. Article written by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan.
Friend of yours and mine. Yep.
Washington is driving the world to the final war. Ukraine presented the perfect opportunity for Washington to advance its hegemonic agenda. In a speech at the National Press Club last December, which means December 2013, and anybody could Google it up, Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland boasted that Washington had invested $5 billion in non-governmental organizations, NGOs, in Ukraine for the purpose of the NGOs to teach democracy to the people of Ukraine.
In other words, a coup in the streets.
Yep.
Now, that $5 billion, you will never find that in the American federal government budget, even though the Constitution says no monies shall be spent from the Treasury, but for those recorded in a public journal. I'm almost quoting verbatim. The Congress on its own has created the intelligence community and given them hundreds of billions and let them spend it on its own. You'll never find a recording of who actually got that money and what was done with it. Where did the money come from? The American Treasury. How did it get into the American Treasury? Either tax dollars or money borrowed in the name of the taxpayers, who, of course, have to pay it back.
You know, this article that you've written, it's so powerful. And the information that you're providing here, and how the government has really robbed us of our freedom. Congress has not declared war against Russia, but President Joe Biden is surreptitiously fighting one. Congress can only declare war, as you mentioned, on a country whose military is an imminent threat to America. So I want to comment on that, because you're hearing these little loudmouth clowns like Lindsey Graham and all these others, the Blumenthal, another arrogant little boy, one after another. They go to Ukraine and they keep saying that this is a threat to the world. That what's going on in Ukraine is a threat to the world. It's not a threat to the world. As you said, this has been going on back and forth to them, since 1730.
Right.
And then Macron, the president of France, was visiting China last week. And he goes on to say, Macron calls for Europe to not be caught in the conflict in Taiwan. He said, because the question Europeans need to answer, is it in our interest to accelerate on Taiwan? No. So is it in our interest to ramp up the war in Ukraine? I mean, by the way, this is the Macron and the France that invade Mali and Niger just recently because they need their uranium from Niger, because they have more nuclear plants in France than anywhere else. Oh, we could go there, but we shouldn't be involved in Taiwan. And the only reason he's saying this, by the way, is the bottom line, because they got to do business with China, because
Correct.
The Chinese got 1.4 billion people, and
Correct.
It's the fastest growing economy in the world.
You know, he's an example of a stopped clock being right twice a day. He happens to be right on this. And that quote you have, I think there's a following line where he says, we will not be seduced by the American rhythm, meaning Americans like to fight wars, and the Chinese overreaction. I mean, that has caused quite a disturbance in Europe. I applaud him for saying that, even though I can't applaud much else of what he does.
Oh, yeah, he's a little arrogant boy. Here it is. Is it in our interest to accelerate on the subject of Taiwan? No. The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must become followers on this topic and adapt to the American rhythm and Chinese overreaction. He also warned of a trap for Europe if it got caught up in this crisis that is not ours.
That is a damning and very poignant phrase that I have not heard before, referring to American imperialism as a rhythm, something we do over and over again. You know this. I know this. The people watching us now know this. The people that read the Trends Journal know this. The people that watch Judging Freedom know this. But I've not heard a Western leader refer to the American pattern of imperialism as an American rhythm. And again, I disagree with President Macron on many things, but we have to be intellectually honest. On this, he is correct. He is 100%. Called out the U.S.
And this is like from the Financial Times. Macron's Taiwan stance provokes outcry.
Yeah.
Diplomats and lawmakers in the U.S. and Central and Eastern Europe attacked Macron for being soft on Beijing and critical of the U.S., especially given that it has backed Europe dealing with the fallout from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So attacked Macron. And again, it's not any of our business.
I'm thinking.
By the way, what they call people like ourselves that don't want to become involved in these foreign entanglements because they're no threat to America, they call us isolationists.
I don't care what they call us. As far as I'm
saying
concerned,
the stupidity of it.
We are following one of the greatest speeches in American history, which is George Washington's farewell address, warning against foreign entanglements, which, for the most part, until Teddy Roosevelt came along, the American government followed.
Well, you forgot Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah. Well, Teddy preceding Wilson.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant FDR. You're right. Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah.
Wilson, of course, doing far more damage with World War I and all the other stuff.
Yeah, I was thinking FDR. Yeah, what Teddy Roosevelt, the invasion of Cuba, and we still got Guantanamo over there, right?
Right. It's a lease. When does that lease expire? Who do we send our lease payments to? I mean, it's a farce. Just stole the property. Yep. 40,000 square miles. That thing is half the size of New Jersey.
You know, there's another article that came out, and public support among the United States voters is ebbing for the Ukraine war. They say it's fallen from 60% last May to 48%. And this is an Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research. So the reason, of course, people are tired of it, and people are living paycheck to paycheck, and they don't want our money going to Ukraine war. So what do you think, again, what do you think is going to happen with this? The America's going to keep ramping up the war? Or the war going to come to an end?
Joe Biden and Tony Blinken and Lloyd Austin have not given themselves an off-ramp. So I don't know how this will end from American involvement. I think the war will end when Putin says, okay, we've chased you out of eastern Ukraine, where all the Russian-speaking people are. This is all we want to do. We're going to stop. Zelensky said last week that they won't stop, again, nonsense, until the Ukrainian flag flies over Crimea. I assume he's saying that just for domestic political reasons. He can't possibly believe that to be so. So at some point, they'll just stop fighting, even though the Americans don't want them to do it. How Biden gets out of this, I don't know. But I do believe, just my gut, Gerald, that the president, Joe Biden, wants to run for re-election as a wartime president. So I don't think this is going to stop before 2024. His heroes are Abraham Lincoln and FDR, and he wants to emulate them by running as a wartime president. This is his war. He ought to look at what happened to Lyndon Johnson in 1968. Afraid to run for re-election, and rightly so, because the Vietnam War had become so unpopular. But he and his people seem to think they can pull this off. And they've been in this business for a long time. When Colin Powell was lying at the UN about weapons of mass destruction, when George W. Bush was throwing Phil Giraldi out of the Oval Office because Phil, as the CIA briefer, told the president there are no weapons of mass destruction. The chief of staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee were beating the drums for war. Who were they? Well, the chief of staff then is now the Secretary of State, and the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee then is now the President of the United States. This pattern doesn't change, Gerald.
No, Blinken and Biden, they're B and B, right? Yeah. Blinken and Biden, there's not a war that they didn't love, not a war that they didn't support. And again, these are the guys, the tough-talking guys that they don't go fight. No, they just send others to go do the dirty work. And again, anybody that wants to support a war, put on your military drag, get your gun, go over there and fight, or shut your mouth. That's the way I look at it. And again, as you said, in Ukraine, they're taking people our age and young boys to go fight. So they're in, they could go lead the charge or shut your mouth. Anybody that wants to support war, go fight it. That's the way I look at it. Judge, this article that you've written, again, it's so powerful, and everybody should really go to Judging Freedom. And of course, you're going to have on again Colonel Douglas McGregor talking about the Ukraine war and where it's going.
So I have Scott Ritter, a dear friend of yours and mine, one of the most courageous people in America and one of the most brilliant on military and intelligence matters, today at 11 Eastern. At 3 Eastern, I have a man the Judging Freedom audience loves to hate, former CIA senior official, 40 years in the CIA, Jack Devine, who starting to acknowledge that the Russians are moving westward and can't be stopped. And then tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern,
Wow.
The great Colonel McGregor himself.
Wow. Well, thank you for all that you're doing. Listen, everybody listen to what this man is doing and what we're doing to try to give people the best that we can to bring life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness back to what used to be called the United States of America. Now it's the USSA, the United Soviet States of America. And by the way, everyone, May 27th, up here in Kingston, New York, on the Four Corners of Freedom, we're going to have another Peace and Freedom rally. It's going to be called Make America Healthy Again in every way that we can. And Judge Napolitano is going to be a speaker. Gary Null, John Whitehead, and others. And we're going to do everything we can to restore the American spirit that has been stolen away from us. And it's time to do it because most people are fed up with the establishment system anyway. And we need to build the path back to what it used to be. And Judge Napolitano is doing everything he can to do it. Judge, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Gerald. Always a pleasure. Until next Wednesday, my friend.
Ciao, ciao.